Good afternoon, good morning, whenever it is that you're watching this. Thank you so much for taking a moment just to take a look at this video. What this is really is something to highlight Black History Month. Want to share with you that a few days ago we had kind of a staff retreat for Uplift Church, and one of the staff members asked, Pastor, is there something that you can do to kind of give us an introduction to Black church history? It's something that I absolutely love, and I wanted to figure out a unique way to do it because at Uplift we're focusing on the importance of discipleship throughout the year, so I didn't want to divert from that. So I figured these sort of videos can be one way to introduce some people to Black church history, and kind of there's a lot to be shared there. So my hope is to share maybe 10 to 15 minutes these videos every day. Post them online, post them on YouTube, put them on our website so you can benefit from them, and then for years to come someone else can learn from this as well. So what I want to do is kind of give you a highlight of some of the stuff I got on my bookshelf here. For those who watch the Uplift Bible Study or the Uplift Prayer Call, you will know that the bookshelf looks a little different because I've got some highlighted books here. Just some that may be helpful for you if you're looking to build a library that addresses some Black church history stuff. If you're a white person and you want to learn a little bit more of your Black person and you just don't know it, some of these books may very well be helpful for you if you don't have them. If you're Asian or Hispanic, whatever, you want to learn a little bit more about it, definitely invite you to grab some of these books and learn a little bit. So I'm going to highlight just a couple of them, and then we're going to dive into our lesson. My hope will be to give you some biblical perspectives, Blacks in the Bible, and then from there discuss a little bit more also about East Africa, West Africa, and then from there we're going to move to the Atlantic slave trade and really kind of Latin America. We're going to stop there today, and then tomorrow we'll pick up on North America and how slaves kind of practice their religion and how Christianity plays a part in that. So quick overview of some of the books just to highlight. The Warmth of the Suns. Let's start there. Warmth of the Suns is one book that talks about the migration patterns of ex-slaves. Really, so I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and she talks about how many people from like the Louisiana area made their way to California. And so if you eat red beans and rice and gumbo in California, you're welcome. So it talks about some of those migration patterns, or like from Mississippi, Delta area up to Detroit during the industrial age, South Carolina, North Carolina, making your way to DC and up to New York. So if you want to learn a little bit more, even about some patterns in people's moving, it may shed a lot of light for you. Righteous Discontent by Evelyn Higginbotham. If you're a woman and you're in the Black Baptist church, this is a great book for you that really talks about the power of Black women in the Black church. Great book. Talks about Nana Helen Burroughs and her role with National Baptist and all kinds. So great book. I highly encourage you to check this one out. The Black Gods of the Metropolis is another interesting book. It's called Black Gods of the Metropolis, Negro Religious Cults in the Urban North. It highlights some of some religious fringes for Black folk, like Daddy Grace and things like that. So this is a great one for you to take a look at. Malcolm X's autobiography is another really good one. I learned a lot about Malcolm X and kind of while he was in jail, how he had access to so many great books, as well as Harvard professors would come by and teach there, and so he benefited from that. Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black History Month. At the time, it would have been Black History Week. Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. If you are African American, it's kind of like a must-have. David Walker's Appeal. I love this it was called a pamphlet. David Walker's appeal to the colored citizens of the world was really asking for slaves to rebel, to break free of slavery. In essence, saying God is on our side. David Walker was a brother who had his own business up north, and so the way they got this pamphlet out was amazing because it was outlawed. They would literally sew it into people's garments and things like that to get it to slaves in the South, and so slave owners were often shocked when they found out that their slaves had access to this, they were trying to figure out how to stop it. Then from there, you got some liberation theology stuff. James Cone, credited for being the father of black liberation theology, not just liberation theology, but black liberation theology. His book, Black Theology of Liberation, major contributor to black theology. J.D. Otis Roberts would have been one who kind of sparred a little bit in writing with Cone, because J.D. Otis Roberts wrote Liberation and Reconciliation, not just liberation. For example, in this one here, Black Liberation of Theology, James Cone start in the preface. He says, America won't be great in essence until whites begin to hate their whiteness and desire in their hearts to be black. James Cone was radical. J.D. Otis Roberts was like, okay, I got what you're saying, but we need liberation and reconciliation. W.B. Du Bois, another great one. You need to have souls of black folk. It's still relevant today. I've got some by my New Testament professor, Kane Hope Felder, great New Testament scholar, just retired from Howard University School of Divinity. We've got Howard Thurman's With Head and Heart. If you go to Howard School of Divinity, you're going to learn about Howard Thurman, Dr. T, phenomenal scholar. Ivan Van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus. Just a few books that if you want to build up a library, grab either one of them. Just begin somewhere. It may be, I'm sure it will be helpful for you. All right, so in order for us to really talk about black church history, we got to talk about the Bible. And I want to start with the Bible because there is this misconception that Christianity is, quote, the white man's religion. I think it's absolutely comical. But there is this particular misconception that Christianity was used, and to some level it was used to try to enslave people, but it doesn't make it the white man's religion. And so I want to start with the Bible to really kind of dispel that myth, because black folk had this way before Europeans did. So let's begin there with the Old Testament, way before we even get to the New Testament and to Romans. Let's begin with the Old Testament. I want to read from Numbers chapter number 12. Numbers chapter number 12. Verse number 1. We're talking about Moses here in Numbers chapter number 12. Moses now would have been one who would have grown up in an Egyptian Pharaoh's house. Last time I checked, Egypt is still on the continent of Africa. All right, so let's check this out. Chapter number 12, verse number 1. Moses' brother and his sister got issue with Moses. Here's what it is. Verse number 1 says, Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married. And they said, Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? Why is this important? They are taking issue with Moses because Moses has married a Cushite woman. I'm going to help you to understand who the Cushite woman is with my next scriptural reference. They're mad because it looks like Moses is marrying up, hence their terms. Has God only spoken to you? Are you better than us? Numbers chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, really. From there, to understand really this Cushite piece, let's go look at Isaiah. Isaiah chapter number 20. Isaiah chapter number 20. Verses, I'll say 4, 5, and 6. I'll just start with verse number 4, Isaiah chapter number 20. And this particular section of chapter 20 in my Bible is called Prophecy About Egypt and Ethiopia. So already in the Old Testament, you can't get Africa out of it. So let's look here at verse number 4. And it says, So the king of Assyria will lead away the captives of Egypt and the exiles of Cush, young and old, naked and barefoot, with buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. Then they will be dismayed and ashamed because of Cush, their hope, and Egypt, their boast. So the inhabitants of this coastland will say in that day, Behold, such is our hope. where we fled for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and we, how shall we escape? So it's talking about Cush then, it's referencing it as Ethiopia. Moses married an Ethiopian woman. Got it? That's in Numbers. That's way before Europeans want to see that. So now let's jump again. Let's find some more. 1 Kings chapter number 10. 1 Kings chapter number 10. We got old King Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 10. Just begin with verse number 1. Now when the queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with difficult questions. So Queen of Sheba comes to test Solomon. Now, verse number 10 through 12 is amazing. Queen of Sheba, which is in Africa, I'm going to get to that in just a quick second. Verse number 10 says, she gave to the king 120 talents of gold and a very great amount of spices and precious stones. Never again did such abundance of spices come in as that which the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. So first of all, she was already a baller. As a matter of fact, ain't nobody bring as much as she brought. That's right there in the Bible. Then it says, verse number 11 is really going to shock some people, but it's right here in your Bible and in my Bible. Verse 11 says, also, the ships of Hiram. The what? The ships. Yeah, the ships of Hiram, which brought gold from Orpah, brought in from Orpah a very great number of almond trees and precious stones. The king made of the almond trees supports for the house of the Lord and for the kings also, and lyres and harps for the singers, which almond trees have not come in again, nor have they been seen to this day. So she had ships too. Ivan Van Sertimus that came before Columbus reminds us that Africans had ships a long time ago. All right, so that's a couple of Old Testament references. I want to give us this as well from Dr. Kane Hope Felder's Troubling Biblical Waters when it comes to who the Queen of Sheba is. Who the Queen of Sheba is. He says this. With regard to even Semitic languages. He talks about for the Queen of Sheba, European scholars try to make her out to be Arabian, not African, but he says Josephus, and I got his book down here, Josephus, a Jewish scholar during the early church period, as well as early church fathers, all say that she was Queen of Sheba, Queen of Egypt and Ethiopia. So that's really important there, and that's also important when you come to Ethiopia. To this day, there is a temple in Ethiopia that's believed to house the Ark of the Covenant, like literally. So they had, I haven't even gotten to the Melchizedek piece. All that goes down to Ethiopia. So throughout this Old Testament, you've got interaction with Africa. But what he notes here, Kane Hope Felder is a phenomenal linguistic type scholar, and he hits on something here. He says, based on linguistics, epigraphic, and literary evidence, there is little doubt that a strong tie exists between Ethiopia and South Arabia. For the first millennium BC until early Christian times, it is also clear that the two shores of the southern end of the Red Sea share a linguistic, literary, religious, and historical tradition. And then further on in this chapter, he talks about the similarity between Ethiopian Coptic kind of language and Hebrew. I studied Hebrew, and the languages, the structure of the alphabet is very similar when you begin to look at it. He says that they were in dialogue with one another. Each culture benefited from the other. And so that's helpful also to know, to see the influence of African traditions just in the Old Testament. All right, let's move now from the Old Testament. A couple of quick references to the New Testament. Then we're going to unpack some other African stuff. All of this that I'm describing now, y'all, is on the east coast of Africa. So just in the Old Testament alone, we've got Africa being involved before Europeans were ever present. All right? So for now, let's look at this. This is fun for me because this became a hot debate yesterday with a couple people said this, but one, it was all on Fox News because they say that Reverend Sharpton said Jesus was a refugee. This is all going to President Trump's executive order against some refugees from particular countries or what have you. So people, one guy that I know, preacher I know, called him an idiot. And I was like, well, yeah, he was kind of biblically right on that one. So I'm going to give you this Jesus refugee reference. Matthew chapter number 2, was Jesus a refugee or not? Matthew chapter number 2, beginning with verse number 13, it says this. Now, when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him. So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night and left for Egypt. He remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. Out of Egypt I called my son. All right, so that's one quick reference there. Mark chapter number 15. Mark chapter number 15. I'm just going to give us this particular reference. Mark chapter 15, verse number 21. When Jesus is taking his cross up Golgotha's hill, the Roman soldier stopped a brother by the name of Simon. Simon, they grabbed him. Simon of Cyrene, it was said. Simon of Cyrene had to carry Jesus' cross as well. Cyrene, y'all, is in Libya. So it's also called Simon the Niger in many translations. Niger is Latin for black. Got it? All right, so Acts chapter 2, same thing happened. In Acts chapter number 2, when the Holy Spirit descends on them, it talks about the people that were there, and they mention Egypt and Libya as well. It is not until Acts chapter 16, when Paul gets his Macedonian call, that he begins to bring the gospel message to the European continent. All right, so I want us to see just that piece alone. So that's really now East Africa. Christianity is all involved on the eastern coast of Africa. Biblical references, God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all of those are already all along the east coast in Africa, well before it hits Europe. So I want us to understand that. But now, West Africa is a very different story. West Africa, it's a lot more Muslim presence there. I'm going to get to that. So the first blacks that Europeans met in West Africa were called the Black Moors. And they're called the Black Moors because there were another group of Moors called, they were light-skinned Moors, and so that's kind of the difference. Make sure you don't get them confused. Not just Moors, but they were Black Moors, M-O-O-R-S. In the 15th century, Portuguese sailors, they ventured up the west coast of Africa. They were looking for trading and some more wealth, and so they began to see these black folk there, and as early as the 1440s, y'all, they began to steal and enslave people. Matter of fact, one reference says in 1448 they had already stolen as much as 900 black people and enslaved them. But while on the East Coast, they tried to bring European Christianity to Western Africa. They failed miserably. As a matter of fact, it wasn't until ex-slaves came back to West Africa that Christianity began to spread there. I support Locke Carey, Foreign Mission. Locke Carey was one of those who went back to bring Christianity to West Africa. When they saw black folk, that's when they really embraced it along the western coast. Islam, though, along the western coast was more prominent at that time during the 15th century than was Christianity. However, it didn't mean Islam was dominant. Islam was just more present there. What was more dominant was the tribal religious traditions. And so that that was being practiced there on the west coast of Africa. It was common on the west coast to believe in a higher or a supreme creator, a higher God or a supreme creator. And so the best reference would be, the best analogy would be, your high God is like the parent. And there were lesser gods which were mediators between mankind, humanity, and the high God. So you got the people, the lesser God, which is a mediator, and the high God. Let's try it another way. For those who understand it from a Christian perspective, you got the people, and from a Catholic perspective, you would have Mary. You do Hail Mary, full of grace, or St. Peter, pray for us. That's a mediator between God. So that's kind of what was practiced on the western side of Africa. Some West Africans also had kind of a pantheon of gods, which included some people like Shango. I love referencing Shango. I'm going to tell you why. Shango, y'all, is West African deity, and Shango is said to be the god of thunder, rain, and lightning. And for me, I will never forget this name. And this shows up later on in our little lesson piece on Black church history because of Africanism, some of the African traditions. Shango for me is important because when I learned about Shango, I was reading about an African a slave woman who's from West Africa, and during a storm, she was looking for an axe because Shango's symbol is an axe. And she was looking for this axe to chop the ground to break the back of the storm. And I remember when I read that, I broke down in tears because of the Africanism. Here's why. When I was a child and a great storm was coming, a thunderstorm was coming, my grandmother would make me run outside, grab an axe, and chop the ground. She didn't know why she was doing it, but the more I read about Black church history, about Black religious experiences, I now understand that was an Africanism that carried over from West Africa, and slavery still couldn't kill it. And that was an amazing piece to me. So Shango would have been part of that pantheon. Now, with all of this, the higher God, the lesser God, for example, in the Yoruba tribe, they would have had one called the high God, would have been Olorun, Olorun. When Europeans saw this is absolutely comical to me. When they saw this, and how they had higher gods and lesser gods, and the way they worshiped their gods, Europeans said it was demonic and it was devil worship. And I think this is comical because the same people did not mind reading great books about Odysseus. They didn't mind reading the great books of the Odyssey, rather. They didn't mind talking about Poseidon and about Zeus, their pantheon. As a matter of fact, to this day, there's movies made about those as if they weren't demonic and evil. So this is important to understand. Even how some people view it today is influenced by what Europeans, even in the 15th century, were saying about West African traditions. All right? But not only that, during that time, or even to this day, West African religious traditions, people would wear certain colors or eat certain foods that their deity liked. They would avoid colors and food that their deities did not like. As a matter of fact, even in Haiti to this day, some communities use certain paint colors on purpose because of these West African religious traditions. Also, during that time, for West African religious traditions, the ancestors played a major role. And so you didn't want to do anything to offend your ancestors. At some level, it was believed that your ancestor was also a mediator for you because the ancestor was in the spirit realm, which would have been closer to the higher gods. All right? So they had great respect for the ancestors. Not only for the ancestors, they also had a great respect for the elderly, because the elderly remembered the ancestors because they were closer to them. They remembered the stories because this was an oral community. So that's also why they had a great respect for the elders. And for funerals. During that time, you would not skimp out on a funeral. A funeral would be long and it would be dramatic, and you still trying to figure out why some black folks' funerals are long and dramatic. It would be long and dramatic, and it's also to honor and show love for the elder person or the ancestor who has passed. And so even if they went into debt, they would make sure the funeral was major. Now, with all of this in mind, the ancestors, the elderly, the funeral, the higher, the lesser gods, we get to something else that's kind of spooky now, right? That's something they would do to prevent sicknesses or prevent them being attacked. Is they would use these things called jujus, J-U-J-U-S, or grigris, G-R-I-S, or talismans, and it was really to be a protection for them. It was asking their ancestors to protect them, their family, or their village against certain evils or against certain sicknesses. And that became voodoo dolls. As if you poke holes in it. It's like, man, listen, it was really a talisman to be protected. It was when this particular movie called The White Horseman, they thought it would be a great cinematic thing to make it look like it was voodoo dolls and people coming back to life. No, that had nothing to do with the original West African kind of traditions. All right, so that's a little bit there about the West African side. Also, what they would do, they would have music in their religious experiences, right? So the drums and the dancing. Not only would they have drums and dancing, during that time, even in Haiti today, it is said that the lesser gods would possess the people. And they would begin to dance based on the music that the lesser god liked. And so when the drum beat would go on, the people would move a certain way. Pastor Ball, why does this matter? Come a little closer. There was a time when they did not want black folk to move in church because it appeared demonic. But it was an expression, it was an emotiveness that people shared, which was more of a West African tradition. And even to this day, black folk are still emotive in church. It may very well be a carryover from our West African tradition. So, all right, that's a little bit there about West Africa. So now let's move from there to the slave trade. So we know the Portuguese got there. Others then began to come. Now slave trade begins to happen. So let's go to Latin America, right? Latin America, the gods of West Africa lived on. Let me say that again. The gods of West Africa lived on. As a matter of fact, to this day, many of those African traditions and Africanisms still live on. In Brazil, they had candomblé, C-A-N-D-O-M-B-L-E, candomblé. They had that in Brazil. In Cuba, they have Santeria. In Trinidad, they have Shango still. And in Haiti, they have voodoo. These were not the movie sort of things that you see where you going to kind of put some kind of hex on people, but really, it was the West African traditions. And the reason those things lived on, particularly in Latin America, was because of how many slaves were there. They greatly outnumbered the Europeans, and so they had more freedom to practice their religious traditions, and they still lived on. As a matter of fact, there is something called synchronization. It became syncretized with the Catholic religion as well. Many of them were willing to embrace Catholicism. Why? Because the pantheon seemed to relate to what Catholicism was. Here's how it worked out. Matter of fact, one guy, Herskovitz, his name will show up later on, he said this, that in Trinidad, they had hyphenated names. Hyphenated name between the Catholic reference and the West African deity. So, for example, Ogun, O-G-U-N hyphen St. Michael. Or John the Baptist hyphen Shango. In Trinidad, these things, if you go into some churches to this day, they still have that hyphen there. And so it became syncretized as well. So that's just a little bit of an overview how some of these things kind of carried over. So I'm going to stop right now because I don't want it to be too long. Tomorrow we will go into the Americas, now to North America, and we're going to deal with E. Franklin Frazier and Melville Herskovitz and their understanding of Africanisms. E. Franklin Frazier said the African traditions were lost. Herskovitz says no, they still live on in many of these Africanisms, and we're going to see how Christianity really plays a part in that. We'll do that on tomorrow. Hopefully it's been helpful. Listen, if you learned something by this, if you think it's going to be helpful for somebody else, do me a favor. Please share this. If you got some debate, you disagree with some of the stuff I said, go ahead, leave a comment, shoot me a message. You got questions, let me know. If you've got some book references that may be helpful for viewers as well, put them in a comment. It may be a blessing to somebody else. Hopefully tomorrow I'll be able to load a little bit more of a video, and let's understand a little bit more about Black church history. Peace.